Horror movies. They tend to come out every January and October, even occasionally sprinkled here and there throughout the year. You've seen them whether the trailer looks good or bad, just based on pure interest. But let me tell you something that you probably realized at one point. They suck. Of course, not all of them, but the majority. This is why when we get that rare movie that can be mentioned with the classics like Halloween and The Exorcist, the horror community cheers. Unfortunately, I don't think audiences today understand what horror is these days. For some reason, jump scares have become the standard for what scary is, which I see as nonsense. Hopefully this video gives a clear understanding on the current status of the horror genre. First off, let's get the obvious out of the way. Horror films tend to make their money back. Most of them have a budget of about 30 million or less in most cases. When opening weekends come back to show a 20 million plus profit at the box office, this basically means that the films are broken even. It's a guarantee that it will recoup its money within the time frame that the movie will be in theaters for. We see this every year with the majority of the films released. Here are some examples. I get people want to have a good time with their friends and all, but it's mandatory to stop supporting garbage like these films. Next on the agenda is jump scares. Now, this could be number one for some of you, but let's face it, money allows for the repetition of this issue. Jump scares, when done correctly, are highly effective. There will always be an instant reaction to jump scares because of the circumstances that create it. Sudden silence, atmospheric uneasiness, the characters being in fear, and then a loud noise with a scare. The problem is, the actual scare, or the thing that causes the scare, isn't something horrifying the majority of the time. The credit goes to the sound effect. The movie has silence for so long that sudden noise can shock your system when it occurs. Think about it. If the scene was in a different movie, where the scene was focused on the silence in a house and suddenly cut to the city traffic, you'd probably jump at the sudden shift. The item that we should be scared of during these scenes aren't even scary. They're false scares, unfortunately. Usually someone's friend or an animal or some toy. The problem with this is that it's a decoy from the actual scare. So now when the actual scary thing occurs, there is no suspense or tension built because it's been released from the previous scare. It's like the feeling you get when you get on a roller coaster. The build up to the big first drop has you question why you got on the ride in the first place. But once the second drop occurs, you're prepared and you're excited. Horror movies heavily depend on the feeling of why you went to see the movie in the first place. This leads me to my second point. What is real horror? I've discussed in my It Follows videos that I had someone tell me that the movie wasn't scary. I feel like there's a lot more people that feel like this when movies aren't jump scare heavy. Movies like The Invitation, Good Night Mommy, Don't Breathe all fall into this category. As stated earlier, the jump scare is an instant gratification type of tool. Horror, according to Webster, is painful and intense fear, dread, or dismay. It involves intense aversion or repugnance. In other words, horror is the negativity that comes with wanting to avoid inconsistent or opposite events that someone is used to. That's why the classics are the classics. The Exorcist has a girl being possessed. A Nightmare on Elm Street is about people dying in their sleep. The Shining is about a father who's gone mad. Audition is about a guy who's interested in a crazy girl. All of these situations are contradictory to what is normal. Now I know someone's going to say, but Marquise, what about James Wan? You said you like him and his jump scares. Yes, I do. But the jump scares are actual scares that relate to the story. Remember the clapping scene in The Conjuring? What if that moment was in the mother's head, since we know she's going crazy? What if it's not the house, but the family having mental issues based on their personal lives? Remember in Insidious when the red demon popped up during the day? It works because the lady's telling the story, so a flashback is expected. But when we see the red demon, it's during the day in the present. You guys get the point. The scares have to be meaningful to the story, and they're scary. Speaking of story, this is a lost art in horror films. Apparently, introducing the characters in 20 minutes and killing them off one by one is scary. A great example of this is The Bye Bye Man. This movie sucked, but it was quite funny. If I laugh during a horror movie, that's not a good sign because it's the opposite reaction that's supposed to be occurring. I wasn't connected to any of the characters and they kept doing dumb stuff that was obvious. A good story is something like Ringu or The Ring, depending on what version you like. We follow a single mother and her son who are infected by this videotape. We learned about them in the backstory behind the videotapes. It's relatable too, with videotapes being a big thing back then. Yes, there are a couple jump scares here and there, some of which that are actually scary, where there's an arc that makes it feel more like a mystery than a horror movie. We get this in Halloween with Nancy Loomis, where we figure out she's an outsider in her group of friends, and she's an everyday girl. So when the big stuff happens, we root for her to survive. Nowadays, people do stupid stuff, and there's no connection to the characters. I don't know about their personal lives or why they are the way they are. Instead, they split up and die. There's no emotion evolved from the audience. Overall, horror movies are amazing, but as of late, they haven't really done anything for me. They're probably my third favorite genre behind noirs and dramas, and I just want the feeling I had when I first saw the classics. I remember seeing The Exorcist at 3 o'clock in the morning and seeing Pazuzu's face and being scared. I remember seeing Michael get up after being stabbed with a hanger. I remember seeing the girl from the well coming out of the TV. It just feels like horror nowadays are for cash grabs. Sure, we get that one movie a year that can be considered a modern classic, but most of them are just making everybody's worst top 10 of the years. Japanese films have been big for the past 20 years because they focus on the horror aspect of things happening at any time, not just when the silence goes out. Also, the stories are phenomenal. Unfortunately, those remakes have sucked for the most part, but the indie scene seems to understand what real horror is. We also had a found footage craze where everything had to feel real. Most sucked, but there were some gems that will stand out and stand the test of time. Maybe I'll do a video on J-horror and found footage sometime. For now, the horror we receive is because of us. Much like the issue with blockbuster movies, my question to you is this. Do you find the horror movies relatable, or just as a good time with friends? What's worth more to you?